I'm a fourth generation beekeeper. My family started keeping bees, back in the late 50s, early 60s with my great grandfather. He was one of the first contracted beekeepers out of South Texas to have a contract with Sioux Bee Honey. From there, my grandfather kept bees back in the 70s. My uncle kept bees in the 80s, late 80s, early 90s. Gee, my earliest memory. I think I was 3 years old, and my great aunt was dying. She was dying of cancer, and near the end of her life, the only thing that she could stomach or eat was honey. So I remember my grandmother spoon feeding her honey, and being I was 3 years old, I thought that the honey was magic and it was going to save her. That's my earliest memory. After that, I think I was about 5 or 6, and I would stand in my grandfather's backyard and watch my uncle work his bees. And from there, I didn't really have anything to do with beekeeping after that. I really didn't want to. Growing up, I felt disconnected from my family, so I turned away from all that. When I turned 21, my wife at the time wanted a garden, so I built one and planted a garden for her. And our first year, we didn't produce any crops, and she asked me why. I said, well, there's no bees in the area, which is a common problem. The bees are getting scarce. And she asked me if I can get her some bees, and I was like, you know what, I still got family that keeps bees. So I asked my family how could I get a hold of some bees, and they said, well, a free way to get bees is to do a bee removal. So I got on Facebook, made some phone calls, started asking a bunch of people if anybody had any bees that I could come grab, and got a call. My neighbor has bees. I went to go get them. They were Africanized, and I had never messed with Africanized bees before, and I think I got stung up 20 times in the first 15 minutes. I wasn't wearing a proper suit. And from that moment, I was completely fascinated with honeybees. It's like 4 generations of information just switched on in the back of my head, and I knew everything. Not literally everything, but I woke up one day and I just knew all these things about bees I didn't know the day before. So one hive turned into 2, 2 turned into 10 turned into a business, and now I'm a commercial honey producer. Bees are very important to the ecosystem. A lot of people don't know that bees are one of the few insects in the whole world that can pollinate just about anything. I'm not saying that they will pollinate anything, but they can. Basic rule of bees is if it smells good to you, it smells good to them, and they like flowers that smell good. The main reason why bees are so important is because is for our food. 30% of the food that you eat is been touched by bees, whether it's fruits or vegetables, especially since today a lot of people get their food from the grocery store, and you have to fill those grocery stores. And in order to make that much food to fill all the grocery stores all over the United States and all over the world, you have something called monoculture. And monoculture led to insects disappearing in large areas, which meant there are no pollinators locally to pollinate those crops, and you have to have bees trucked in to pollinate those crops. So without bees, there'd be no fruits and vegetables. But you can take that a step further and wonder if bees are responsible for the meat that you eat, like beef. Bees pollinate grass, grass turns into hay, hay feeds cattle. Even the beer that you drink, bees pollinate hops. So without bees, there'd be a lot of things that wouldn't be around anymore. My hives are Africanized, so I don't worry about a lot of pests. I don't worry about a lot of disease. I love seeing when my girls are doing really, really healthy. I love seeing tight brood patterns. I love seeing a lot of honey, a lot of pollen. I love seeing a lot of activity. I start talking to my girls. I'm like, man, y'all girls are doing great. Keep it up. Um, and I talk openly with my girls. I'm just not thinking this. I actually talk to my girls. And I call them my girls. You know, I do call them my girls because, you know, I love my hives very much and I'm very protective of my hives. I come here either with my helper or by myself, and I enjoy spending some personal time with my girls. It's a nice little retreat. And honestly, I call myself a commercial beekeeper, and technically it's a job title, but it doesn't feel like work. I love coming out here and visiting with my bees and seeing their progress and their growth. I love seeing a healthy hive. How did Africanized bees get to Texas? Well, it started back in 1957 with a man by the name Dr. Kerr. Was working in Brazil, which is one of the highest producing honey countries in the world. And while he was down there, he wanted to create a super honeybee. He was looking for traits, calmness or docileness of a European bee with the honey making capabilities of an African bee. And African bees make more honey than any other honeybee in the world. This is not to say that their honey is better or sweeter, it's just they make more of it. You know, the honey is always going to what determines the flavor and color of the honey is the nectar source. So that doesn't matter. So he went to Africa and got a handful of hives and brought them back to Brazil and proceeded to mix these two bee species, the European and the African bee. What he wasn't counting on was the defensiveness of the African bee being a dominant trait that carried on into the offspring of the bees that he was mating. And I use the word defensiveness. I don't like the word aggressiveness because they're not being aggressive, they're defending themselves. They're protecting their home, just like anybody else would. A few years went by and he was unable to create this bee that he wanted to create. And just to be on the safe side, to make sure that these defensive bees did not get into the local population, he had queen excluders on the front entrance of the hive, which would keep swarms from leaving. One day, the story goes that one of his beekeepers was sick and they called in for a replacement. This new guy didn't know anything about beekeeping, saw the queen excluders, didn't think they were supposed to be there, so he took them all off, and 6 or 7 swarms got away that day. And from there, they spread through South America, then Central America, then up through Mexico. And in 1994, the first Africanized hive showed up in Brownsville, Texas, killing a man who was mowing his lawn. Initially, it was quite a scare. People who are old enough to remember in the early 90s, the highways were lined with swarm boxes trying to catch these swarms of Africanized bees and keep them out of Texas. Of course, it was unsuccessful, and that project stopped. That fear of the killer bee was imprinted on a lot of children. So that's why you see a lot of people reacting to bees the way they do, swatting at them, running, making a bunch of noise. They're scared of honeybees now. Today, there's a couple of theories going around about Africanized bees. We can't decide if they're getting calmer or we're just getting used to them, because bees still live in general populations. Especially, all the bees in South Texas, most of Texas actually, are Africanized now, but you hear less issues about it. We still have bees that live inside the hollows of trees, especially live oak trees. They tend to hollow through the trunk, and bees love that. They like the negative spaces in your wall. They like upside down flower pots. They like your barbecue pits. People say they can mow around their lawn. They're convinced the bees are not Africanized. Those kind of things don't bother bees as much as they used to. So either they're getting calmer or we're just getting used to them. The population of Texas knows that the bees are Africanized. They have stopped trying to kill them and started trying to save them. This thing called colony collapse disorder showed up. And people are so worried about losing bees from the world that it doesn't bother them that they're Africanized. They still feel the need to save them. So people have become a lot more tolerant. What's the future of the Africanized bee? Well, personally, and I've met a few people who agree with me, I think that Africanized bees are the future of beekeeping. Commercial bees all have their issues. All the breeds do. You got to think about commercial bees as dog breeds. All purebreds have their health issues, and it's the same with commercial bees. When you start breeding for certain traits, you breed out the other traits that make them healthy. Because Africanized bees are feral, they have a very deep gene pool, which makes them very, very healthy. So once commercial bees get hard to keep alive, people might start switching to Africanized bees because they're healthier. But that puts the Africanized bee in danger too, because when a migratory beekeeper decides to turn his hives Africanized for the health, then he's going to put those bees on trucks and start trucking them all over to crops, and those bees are going to start getting sick. So if that happens, the Africanized bee population is going to drop significantly. But as far in my case, I think Africanized honeybees are the future of commercial honey production. Just because you spend less money on keeping them alive and they make a lot more honey.